Well, hey everybody, I'm John Retlin with a retro review of WCW Halloween Havoc 1989. The first of three Halloween Havoc themed retro reviews. 94 and 99 will be coming up at some point, but this was a really, really good pay-per-view. There were only two matches that were I quantified as not good to okay, but everything else had a lot of really, hard-hitting action, got some good time, and told some really, really good stories, and especially that main event. That main event tied two really good feuds in 1989 together, and this is despite the fact that Jim Herd was running the company into the goddamn ground because he was a goddamn idiot that didn't know what the fuck he was doing. But boy, there were so many great talents. They overcame Jim Herd's stupid booking on this night, and this was really, really fucking good. So, I will say it did have a super cheesy opening, though. You had the spoopy, grave graphics and everything. 1989 stuff, it was pretty silly. But they were in Philly, and boy, you could tell they were in Philly with how they were booing some people and cheering a whole lot, cheering some of the heels, booing some of the baby faces. But they were pretty goddamn passionate, except for a couple matches where they were This really did have a big, big card feel. Gordon Solie and Chris Cruz were doing the backstage interviews throughout the night. And we start off with Captain Mike Rotunda versus the Z-Man, Tom Zenk. The Z-Man was appropriate because Tom Zenk usually always put me to sleep. It's not that he wasn't a good athlete, but he was better in tag teams. He was better when he teamed up with Rick Martel as a Can-Am Connection, or when he teamed up with Brian Pillman for a short time in WCW. But boy, Z-Man got booed heavily. I mean, Rotunda got booed because he was a heel, but Z-Man really got booed. There was some decent wrestling, some good work in this, though. Rotunda does take over. The Z-Man does reverse a crossbody in the end. Gets a pin 1, 2, 3. And it was a fine opening match. Z-Man still got booed heavily, but at least it was, at least the babyface went over because Rotunda was only around for a little bit longer in WCW after this. And I mean, I think he became the boat captain, Mike Rotunda, and then left to become IRS for a number of years before he came back to WCW to be a member of the NWO, which everybody was a member of the NWO at one point. I think I was a member of the NWO, and I didn't even know how that happened. But anyway, it was a fine opening match. It was decent for what it was. And then we get Chris Cruz interviewing Bruno Sammartino. He is the referee for the Thunderdome match. And boys, can't we get beyond Thunderdome? Yes, that's a whole MST reference, if you guys get it. If you know, you know. But this was pretty good stuff. I really did enjoy this match. And then we get the Midnight Express and Dr. Death Steve Williams with Jim Cornette versus the Samoan SWAT team, Samu and Fatu, and the Samoan Savage, the Tonka Kid, with Oliver Humperdinck. He was known as the Big Kahuna at this point, and this got a lot of time. This got nearly 20 minutes. It was some hard-hitting action, really, really good stuff. Great. It was weird to see the Midnight Express as baby faces, even though they had been baby faces pretty much since about a year before this. Pretty much when Dusty Rhodes tried to turn the Road Warriors heel just after, after Arn and Tully had left a month before, in September of '88, he turned the Road Warriors heel by having them beat up the Midnight Express and capture the tag titles at a show in New Orleans. And then the Midnight versus original Midnight Express feud turned Stan Lane and Bobby Eaton and Jim Cornette full-fledged baby faces. They were going to turn heels soon after this. This was a pretty good match, though. Very enjoyable. There was some stalling at first, with each trio facing off against each other and everything. Once it got down, the faces dominated. Lane, Eaton, Dr. Death. Dr. Death, it's so goddamn scary just how good he was for a number of years. Whether he was in All Japan or NWA, WCW, didn't matter. Now, it's a shame that his WWE run didn't work out all that well. Thank you, Brawl for All. Thank you, Russo. But this was a very fabulous match. Everybody, got some good time. Eaton, of course, got beat up as he was the smallest of the faces. And then Dr. Death got in. Stan Lane got in. And then they did a spot where Lane got sent into Cornette, and the Samoans won. It was a good match, though. It got some really, really good time, some really long time, and told a really good story. And then we had a Gordon Solie interview with Terry Funk and Gary Hart, and Gary Hart's going to be the designated Terminator, while Ole Anderson's going to be the designated Terminator in the Thunderdome match, meaning the match can only be stopped if you throw in the towel for your team. That's pretty much it. So, then everything kind of comes to a screeching halt here with Cuban Assassin versus Tommy Rich. And the crowd was chanting, Tommy Rich sucks. Now, Tommy Rich, former NWA champion for a short time, years and years before, it was starting to come back in wrestling. It just wasn't working. It wasn't that Rich wasn't good. It's not even that. His work was still good enough, but it had passed him by. Like, wrestling had passed him by. People just didn't care all that much anymore. It wasn't very good. He ends up hitting the Thez press, his move for the 1-2-3. Thankfully, this was like the one low point of the entire show. Though I did kind of dog Rotonda and ZMan, at least the crowd was invested. With a lot of this, they really just didn't seem to give a shit. And to be fair, the Cuban Assassin wasn't a gimmick that anybody really cared about all that much, though the guy was a good worker, and so was Rich. Another Gordon Solie interview. He interviews Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin, the Freebirds. Look, Jimmy Garvin was a much better heel in World Class Championship Wrestling with the poofy hair and everything, and the woman that he had with him when he was basically a complete chicken shit bad guy, and he could run away and he could do that stuff. Now he played good babyface, but when he decided to roid up and get juiced up, and you could tell he was juiced up, it just didn't work. It didn't work at all. And we get the dynamic dudes, Shane Douglas, poor Shane Douglas, having to carry Johnny Ace, John Laurinaitis, and it was against the Freebirds. Jim Cornette was managing the Dynamic Dudes because they had the Midnight Express and Dynamic Dudes kind of doing this little feud thing, and that's when the Midnight Express would turn heel after beating up the dudes, even though they would get cheered. Because no one wanted to cheer the Dynamic Dudes despite how good Shane Douglas was. Certainly not bad. The Dynamic Dudes got booed heavily in Philly. I mean, they did. But for a World Tag Team title match, the work was good enough, and that's despite the fact that Johnny Ace was in there. Garvin ends up paying Douglas for 3. Not necessarily a great match, but it was what it was. I mean, when Shane Douglas is your best worker, and Shane Douglas was a very good worker. Do not misunderstand me, but when he is your best worker by a country mile, you got some issues. Because he can only do so much when he's having to basically carry a slug of a partner and carry 2 guys, Garvin, who was too juiced up to really do anything, and Hayes, who was never really all that good outside of doing the DDT and a moonwalk and talking people into the building. He's a much better singer than he was a wrestler, and he wasn't a very good singer. So we then get the Steiners with an interview. I don't know what the hell Rick Steiner said. If you can, please leave your comments and let me know what the hell he said. Rick Steiner never made a lot of sense in promos. He didn't have to, though, because him and Scott could just go out and do a whole bunch of, power moves and everything. So we get the Steiners with versus Doom with Woman. And of course, it would not be the first time or the last time that Woman would face Doom from a wrestler. And if you know, you know. So we get Doom in the Dom masks. So yeah, this is a whole weird thing where they were wearing masks. It was Ron Simmons and Butch Reed, by the way. They hid them under masks, even though you could fucking tell who they were. A lot of the fans, especially in NWA, would have known who the hell Butch Reed was, even though he worked in Mid-South Wrestling and he worked in other promotions. You knew who the hell Butch Reed was. He'd had a name. And Ron Simmons was pretty easy to recognize, though he had only been wrestling for a couple of years. The match wasn't bad. It was good, all that beef and everything, all this power. And when Rick Steiner's the smallest guy in the ring, that's saying something. I mean, that just shows how big all these guys were. Scott Steiner got beat up for a bit. Woman put something in the mask of one of the Doom members, and he hit a headbutt. And at one point, Jim Ross says, Doom wins, by the way, but Jim Ross says, you can see something's under his mask. His head is protruding. Well, JR, okay, you keep rolling with that there. Good match, though. I did enjoy this. A lot of really good tag matches on this show. And then we get a Lex Luger interview. I'm not a fan of Lex Luger, but I will say as a heel, he was perfectly cast. Because he was very aloof and very unlikable. Then we get Brian Pillman versus Lex Luger. Brian Pillman coming down with cheerleaders. Lex Luger, as the U.S. champion, had lost it to Michael Hayes, I believe, at Wrestle War 89. I did a retro review of that. You can check it out in the Old School Wrestling Reviews playlist that I have here on the channel. But then he won back a couple weeks later. I think Hayes only held it for 16 days, maybe 3 weeks. And then after that, Lex Luger went on a dominant run. He basically held it from there through this Halloween Havoc all the way till Halloween Havoc 89 when he lost it to Stan Hansen and then won it back at Starrcade 80 or Starrcade 90 and then held it until he gave it up after beating Barry Windham at Great American Bash 91 in that cage match where the fans were chanting, "We want Flair." Boy, they put Luger, and especially poor Barry Windham, in such an unenviable position. Easy for me to say. Good match. Really good match. I'm not fond of giving credit to Luger. I do not like Lex Luger. I have made that clear in the past, but I will say this match was very goddamn well done. They put in some good time. Pillman got a lot of offense in. Luger was a dominant heel, slowing it down and everything and hitting some power moves. In the end, a stun gun-like maneuver would catch Pillman, and he would get caught for the 1, 2, 3. Good match. I really enjoyed this match. I thought it was very, very well done. Luger retained, and again would hold the title till the following Halloween Havoc in 1990, and put on some other good matches. And then we get a Road Warrior interview. Well, I can't really do a Hawk impression. I apologize. We get the Road Warriors with Precious Paul Ellering versus the Skyscrapers, Sid Vicious, and unfortunately Danny Spivey. Dan Spivey, who wasn't bad, but he just wasn't great. Sid Vicious, Sid at least looked impressive. I mean, like, you just look at the guy. Like, as far as the look, he had the perfect look as a talent. He really was that goddamn good. I mean, as far as, like, just look and everything. Now, I mean, his work was what it was. He could work with some pretty good guys that could lead him, and he had his moments. But boy, as far as just the perfect look and everything, he had the look and he had the intensity. I don't know why it didn't work out. Oh wait, softball. That's why. But all that beef is what I wrote down for this, because it was just all that beef. It was the Road Warriors and the Skyscrapers. Skyscrapers had not been pinned since coming to the NWA earlier in the year. And Sid was incredibly over. Both guys kept, both teams kept getting in their shots and everything. Animal would eventually get the tag. There would be a DQ with this whole big gold key thing that Teddy Long had. And then the Road Warriors eventually get the advantage and leave with their head held high, winning by DQ. So it was what it was. We then get Sting, Ric Flair, and an Ole Anderson interview. Ole Anderson being the nicest guy that he always goddamn is. Look how happy Ole Anderson is. Ole Anderson was a miserable motherfucker, by the way. Just want to say that. But this was to hype up the main event, which was Sting and Ric Flair with Ole Anderson versus Terry Funk, Great Muta, and Gary Hart. Bruno Sammartino as the referee, and the Thunderdome match. Can't we get beyond Thunderdome, folks? Really, can't we at this point? I said earlier in the review, but can't we get beyond Thunderdome? If you know, you know where I got that from. This was good. There was a fire that happened on one, like, because they had weird like stuff at the top and everything to make it like where it was almost jungle-like, because there were ropes hanging from the cage for people to swing on. And, well, a fire started and everybody's trying to put it out, and Muta just gets on the cage and just sprays the mist at it, and that puts the fire out. Because Muta's like, okay, fuck this, I want to go home. Here, mist, there we go. I'm going to put the fire out myself. Muta was awesome, by the way. He was over with me as a kid in 89. I was only 8 years old. And seeing him at G1 Supercard when he showed up in that Battle Royal, that actually took me back to me, an 8-year-old kid. That was a pretty cool moment. Fucking hell, I'm old. Anyway, as for the match was very, very good. It told the story of Sting and Funk continuing their feud, Sting and Muta carrying on their feud. This was really, really, really good stuff. And the idea was, would Ole Anderson or Gary Hart throw in the towel for their respective team if they were taking too much punishment? I don't know why they bothered having tags at all. They should have just made this a wild brawl, because at first it was a tag team match. Australian Rules tag team match, as JR put it. And then it just became Tornado Tag, and everybody just got in the ring, and Bruno's just like, well, fuck it, just go ahead and do all this stuff and everything. Bruno even got involved at one point, chopping Muta ahead of the finish. But there were some good moments, like Sting swinging from the rope and everything, kind of like Tarzan, and I think JR says that made Terry Funk cheetah, so that was pretty entertaining. This was very, very well done. Ric Flair eventually got Terry Funk in the figure four. Sting had done a couple splashes. Then Bruno got involved when Muta tried to attack him and then knocked Muta out of there. Ole Anderson and Gary Hart are in the ring with their respective towels. Like fighting. I think like they both had him over their shoulder. I think Ole had his on his holded, his in his hand. Gary had his on his shoulder, and then Ole punches Gary, and Gary's towel flies off onto Bruno, and Bruno takes that as a termination, and the baby faces win. Sting and Flair win. So that continues feud, and actually they blow off the Sting Flair feud at the following Clash of Champions in November, which I'll actually be reviewing probably in a couple weeks, probably like when I have a little more free time. But this was a really, really good pay-per-view. I encourage you guys to check this one out. I love the hot crowd, the matches. Yes, there were a couple matches were but this had a really, really good feel. This is a pay-per-view that I really am glad I went back and watched. I need to watch all of it, by the way. I do want to say that much because I remember most of the matches, but I did a lot of it as a refresher course. So this was really, really good. So anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Rithlin. I'll see you soon.